if you want to know what the needs of educational leaders are, and thereby the needs of students, talk directly to them. So if Joe Biden wants to talk to the experiences that principals are having nationally, he needs to put together a principal advisory board and talk to principals who are sitting in the seat doing the work. If he wants to understand the reality of what superintendents are facing, and what a New York City superintendent is facing is very different than someone who might be in Arkansas, what they're facing. Get a coalition of superintendents and deputy superintendents and sit them down and talk about what are your true needs. And let's talk about the primary needs, and then what are your secondary needs. So if I have this amount of money and I can get it directly to you, what do you want me to earmark these funds for, so that you can serve students to the highest levels? Because for some of our communities, and we've spoken about this, it's not new books or computers first. It might be basic needs like on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so that schools in their community service are serving their communities, and they need the funds to continue those resources because they are serving their communities. The other thing we need to say, if we get a seat at the table, if you are committed to equity in our country, then are you creating teams and initiatives when you look at the top leadership? Will we see equity? Will we see your policy and action connected to your dollar? That's the question. And then when they say, well, what should the policy be and what should the money be? We are to step in and give them those ideas.
No. That means they got to write us a check, because OSG is a formidable organization.
Indeed.
That is absolutely one where, don't get us wrong, we come strong, we come thick, we have, a fantastic educators from across the country, but at the same time, they earmark dollars for that.
Hire
coin. Yes. Yeah, I'm here for that.
Yes. And I think that, and then kind of basically carrying it on from what Thea and as well as Simone said, it's really important that we understand that we got to find a more direct route from DC to the schools, or to the classrooms in particular. It is too often that we move from federal to state. Money's being drained from just that transition alone. Then from state to local. And those things, then more funds is drained, because now you gotta have this, this action team, and you gotta have that team, and you gotta continue to hire more people. So now, when we originally had 50 million, that was 15 to 20 million that was supposed to go to states. Now it ends up going into the state. Now from the state to the local, we lose more money because we continue to be top heavy, and then it continues to go down, because now, when we look at the communities that need it most, we never truly get the funds that we were deserving of. Let me just ask this one question of any principal here. But Simone, I mean, I know you deal with your budget quite frequently, but Simone, on average, what does Title I funding look like in your build? If it's not too personal, or if anybody wants to share,
it's not too personal at all. Every dime gets stretched, and I'm the rubber band queen, because every dime gets stretched in every different direction. But the bulk of every dollar goes towards personnel. And part of the issue is the regulation. That's why we need Dr. Fia in there to change the regulation. So if you look at communities where they are doing better than 25% of proficiency, you will see the same triangulation of data. You will see smaller class sizes of at least 20 or under. You will see, if it is a class size that is above 20, they will have multiple teachers. You will see that there are small groups of what they call either morning tutoring or after school tutoring or daily tutoring, of what we call AIS. You will see more in-tuned resources that they will be able to really pinpoint how children are processing information, both online and in person. And you will also see that the only thing on their mind is not the test. So that's what you will find in communities, like Jericho in Long Island, But then you have the 5 boroughs where our funding, 90% of our budget is about personnel. So if the policy says I'm only allowed to hire 1 teacher for every 32 kids, but that's it. So, and it's not as if we can go against that. Yes, we try to be creative. Yes, we try to incorporate other things. Like we would love to have a plethora of after-school programs. We would love to have a plethora of guidance counselors. I would love to have a guidance counselor for every grade, right? And I have 11 grades. So if I had a guidance counselor for every grade, then the 2 or the 1.5 or the 0.5 that I have wouldn't be so stressed out, because there are a lot of other pieces that come into play with regards to hiring, but hiring is the one that ties us to what it is that we're able to do.
And so you got to at least start to have that conversation about, well, Ro, if you had the opportunity to speak to Kamala Harris, President Biden, the Secretary of Education, Dr. Jill Biden, what are you going to ask them, or what are you going to demand from them moving forward?
So Dennis, I can't say equality, because I may need more than another school. And if it's equal, that means everybody's going to get the same amount. So it can't be equal.
Or it can actually balance itself out, because if one is already getting more and one is getting less, the reality about it is that when we say equity, the equity part means that there are going to be kids in the more affluent schools that will be getting money because of the equity conversation. And I think, you know, you're 100% right, Ro, that equity is part of the conversation. But you understand that because we've been having this equity conversation for so long, that now you got to ask the question, why are we still having a conversation about equity? Because reality, back in 1965, when they started Title I funding, that was about equity. Mm-hmm. And 55 years later, we still don't have what we need. We still don't have a level playing field. So it has to find a way, we have to kind of find a way to move beyond equity, closer to equality. May not get there, but equity in itself isn't enough for us to say we can solve those problems. So I definitely agree with that, Ro. And I just think if we think about historically, why this conversation needed to take place today was because equity has never been fair. It has never been fair. It's always been about ways that we can continue to marginalize our community. And that's what's been happening. You know.
But so I'm sitting here listening to the conversation, and I just want to chime in. I don't want to change the trajectory of the conversation, but I want to be a little bit of a devil's advocate, because we always speak about needing more money, right? You know, but as I sit and I think about and do a little bit of a root cause analysis about all the things that plague our schools that our children are in, you know, I keep asking myself, what is throwing money at the problem going to do when the problem is so much more complicated than money? The problem is standardized testing. The problem is unions that do not have children at the center of their concerns. The problem is the fact that there are less than 2% Black males in classrooms nationally. The problem is that there's a proliferation of low expectations. The problem is that children come to school, but there really isn't, they really, it's very hard for them to articulate past a certain grade why they're even there, because and once they get to a certain age, and certainly by the time they get to middle school, they've already lost interest. And so the problem is such a compounded problem, but I always hear that, you know, let's throw money at the problem, that's going to solve the problem. And so I want to really push everybody's thinking and say, yeah, of course, every school can use more money, but really let's, you know, when you look at the problem, when you look at the systemic racism that is inherent in public schooling, when you look at how standardized testing is used, so forth and so on, you know, I just beg us to really do a little bit more of a root cause analysis around, even if we had more money, you know, how do we use that to really get at some of the real issues that keep our children from being successful and being ready for college and career and beyond.
No, and Dr. Small, I agree with you. And one thing I will say is that going back to the initial conversation, the earlier part of this conversation, when I was talking about the $175 billion that has been proposed so that we can get kids back in school in the next 100 days. You know, the purpose of me mentioning the money aspect of it is so that we understand that we've continued to been promised that money is going to solve our problems. We're just simply saying, just give us what you say you were going to give us. Just give us all that you say you were going to give us so that we can do the very best that we can. And so I don't think that throwing money at a problem solves it completely, but it definitely alleviates some of the stresses that principals have to undergo to try to make ends meet, you know, for the sake of their children. So I definitely feel like we as OSG got to continue to have that conversation.
From my perspective as an attorney, when I hear the frustrations of the principals with regards to this notion of equity and how this term has been used, it's the policy and it sounds great, but then when the rubber meets the road, you all are not being empowered to serve the children. And immediately what comes to mind is, again, this is part of the hustle as an attorney that I'm very familiar with, which is the word game, right? I'm going to say yes to you, but if there's wiggle room in that yes, at the end of the day, that yes ends up being a no, or that yes ends up being a so what, which is what it sounds like. So when I think about what to do next, and I think Dr. Small actually has this part of the solution there. And so Principal Dennis is talking about it. And so the ask is a specific ask. The ask, part of that ask clearly is autonomy by the principals to determine within their schools how funds are allocated. I also think part of that ask needs to be very specific as far as some of the things specifically that you all as principals, and you know better than I do, I think if we can create, and I think about the Black Panther Party, right? The Black Panther Party had that 10-point program. So even though there was a big ask, there were still details within that 10-point program that were very specific, that are attributable to everyone. So if we sort of break it back down again to some of the specifics with regards to what the autonomy looks like in different aspects of the budget, and be specific about it and make that the equity part. Like the equity is with, these are the details. We need equity in these specific things. We need equity with, I need a specific part of my budget and autonomy with my guidance counselors. I need a specific part of my budget and autonomy with special education. I need a specific part. So the ask becomes very detailed, such that when you end up having a policy discussion and you end up sort of the big issues, big themes, embedded in that big fuzzy term equity, you all still have the specific asks and the details that are necessary, such that when you get your yes, inside of that yes are the details, more of those details. And I think the beauty of having a group like this, again, is you all actually are empowered to create the ask for principals around the country.
There are a lot of schools and administrators who have the luxury of, networking with politicians in their community and, outsourcing some of the resources. You don't always have the luxury of outsourcing your support, but your voice is your own and you have to speak up. So even, when it comes to budgeting, pay for your development. Like I set aside money for my development right after I pay for teachers. That is a non-negotiable, like speak the truth when your voice shakes. Like it doesn't matter. You do what you need to do in the best interest of your school. Things will begin to change for you. So don't be afraid to ask for what's yours.
No doubt. Listen, Ray, you hit on 1,000 things just now. And just going back to what you said about the forward thinking, we got to remember that the stuff that we're talking about may impact us. And so hence going back to the earlier conversation as to why it's important that we have a discussion about what we say to this incoming administration, as well as, Eric Adams, if he so wins the mayoral election, and other people throughout the country. the questions that we have to ask them I think are extremely important. And so there's three things that I wanted to leave us with that I think that we should at least start with by way of a conversation with these people. The first thing is we need to be able to fix the existing federal programs. If we say that Title I and funds for students with disabilities are supposed to get to our kids, we need to be able to get away from what you talked about earlier, Ray, which is these antiquated, outdated, these nonsensical ways that they are just distributing money, that they the only one who knows the algorithms. Let's understand that entire process. Let's just fix it, right? Because if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But we keep talking about the same thing. So Title I has been, something since, again, 1965. We're talking about 55, almost 56 years of it not necessarily working the way it was designed. So let's go and fix that. Let's not eliminate, let's just try to fix it first. Secondly, we got to define a more direct way for federal funding to get directly to schools and get into classrooms. We can't continue to think of ways of which we got to, be the magicians and solve our budgetary problems, similar to like how Simone is able to do for so many, or what other people like Dr. Small is able to do. Some people just may not have that willingness or that desire, or maybe even that knowledge to know how to do it. But what we got to be able to do is to be able to tell people, listen, I just want you to just send that money directly to me. And if we do have, and when we do have those opportunities to speak to the elected officials, we got to tell them that. Let us know the route that you guys are taking. Don't tell us about all of these stops that it has to take before it gets to us, because it never ends up having the same value. And then I think lastly, we got to talk to them and ask them to basically resist the need to regulate everything that we do, such as curriculum and staffing and everything else. We got to be willing to tell them that. Like, who are you, or what politician is more qualified to talk about my school more so than myself? So being able to express to them the importance of letting us run our schools, give us the resources that we need, and allow us to work our magic is all that we really ask of them. And so I think, again, there's so many things that we discussed today, but I think you can never bring 100 issues to elected officials and say solve all of them. I think that we most certainly need to have them be more clear and more direct as to where this funding is actually supposed to end up. And if it doesn't end up, be able to tell them it didn't end up here. But I thank God for people like Eric Adams and other people in other boroughs and other places throughout the country that do what they can on a local level to make sure that schools have those things that they need for their kids and stuff like that. So I'm just extremely full by this conversation, because I think that it's something that impacts us all. And those of us who recognize that there's been this huge push to get our kids back to school in the next 100 days, we have to be very understanding about the fact that it may not happen. And what we got to do is to make sure that people know why it can't happen. Because if you don't have money right now to do the things that you need, how dare us think about sending our kids back to school in the next 100 days if those fundings don't actually reach the hands of those who need to make those decisions.